وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. As it was mentioned, today the class or the session that we're having is about understanding the practical laws of Islam, understanding Ahkam. And normally when I teach this kind of a class, I would have a board and I would write down some of the things that you need to know to write down. But I still, either way, if we don't have the whiteboard available, I encourage you to make sure that you take notes and make sure that you write down the things that you learn. One of the best advices that I ever received was from Ayatollah Bahjat himself. He told me to always keep notebook, pen, or keep a way that you make notes. Even so much, it was so important, he gave me the money to do that. He said, take this, go buy a notebook, pen, make sure you always keep with you some kind of way that you can keep notes and remember all of the things that you learn. If you think about maybe in the course of your lifetime, how many Ramadans, how many Muharrams, how much Majalis you go to, if you put these some kind of way and consolidate them into a place, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of things that we can learn, we can review, and we can they'll stay better in our memory. You know, sometimes when someone asks you, what did you hear, what did you learn about a speech after the speech is done, then you remember a few things. You remember a funny story, you remember a couple of points, but not necessarily everything or that is important stayed in your mind. So one of the ways that you do that, you write it down. Just like when someone goes to class and they want to make sure they remember and retain the information, they write it down. So before we go into Ahkam itself and some of the philosophy behind it, first and foremost, before we even get to Ahkam, we need to understand that the reason why we are here, the reason for Allah creating us, is so that we can achieve perfection, right? That's the goal that Allah created mankind, is so that He can achieve perfection. Now, in the process of achieving perfection, in order to reach the high level, like for example the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in order to achieve that level, then we need to know what's the path and the way that we need to go in order to get to that level. There's some things that every human being will understand. There's some things that are clear to everyone. Every human being understands these things. These are a part of our essence or our fitrah. A part of our fitrah is the things that we're able to understand those without even anyone necessarily saying to us that this is good or this is bad. If you ask anyone, like for example, you watch the video of how this priest, she was deriving some of the similarities between Islam and Christianity or even Judaism and some of the divine religions. There are some things that are very common, and I'm going to get to that point about why. But even if these religions, they did not exist, and let's say that a person, they didn't believe in any God, there was no religion, there was no laws, no rules. Even if there was no religion, they would understand that if somebody goes and you ask them, if someone goes and takes the life of another person, is that okay? They would say, no, that's not okay. They say, well, this land belongs to you, this book, this thing, it belongs to you. Can I come and take this? They'll say, no, that's not okay. I don't want someone to do that. There's certain things that are very basic that every person can understand. These are part of our fitrah, part of our essence. Every human being can understand these things. Now, of course, there are areas where we may differ. If Allah didn't give us the guidance, and how will we know 100% that these are the rules that are right, these are the rules that are not right, when to do something, when not to do it? So this is when religion comes into play. This is where comprehensive laws, beliefs, everything, akhlaq, all of it comes into play. It gives us what? It gives us a guide. We have some guidelines of what is okay to do, what is not okay to do. If it wasn't for these guidelines, then how would someone know? Some people, they object to this and they say, well, why do we need religion to tell us? We can decide for ourselves. We know, we make laws. We have Constitution and Congress, and we make laws. We decide that this is too fast. On the highway, we decide this is too slow. We decide that if someone takes a life, they should go to jail, etc., etc. We can decide these things ourselves. Why do we need even religion to tell us these laws? So, one of the reasons why is that people differ. They have difference of opinion. So one person says, if you ask them, what is the value of a life? They'll say that the value of a life is another life. Another person will say, well, they should go to jail for 100 years. Another person will say this, and they have different opinions about what the idea of justice is. So the only way to be certain that this is established is if that it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this justice has to come from Allah, meaning that the laws and the rules also have to come from Allah. So religion cannot be something that we make up along the way. It has to be something that comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it needs to be comprehensive. Religion needs to include all aspects of our life. When we talk about Islam, we refer to it as a way of life. It's not just a book of laws, or it's not a story. It's not just about, be nice to your neighbor or some aspects. It's a whole part of life. Everything, every aspect, from marriage to children, family, studying, walking, the way we talk to others, business, every aspect of our life, birth, death, everything we can imagine, Islam has set some guidelines for us. So when we say religion, we're talking about some things that are comprehensive, that include several parts. 3 main parts. One of them is our aqaid. Obviously, these are our beliefs. This is our belief system. Aqaid is the plural of beliefs, of aqidah. These have to do with what we know, all of you know, as the usul of deen, the usul of deen. Then we have the things that have to do with our ahkam, our practical Islam. Ahkam is a word that comes from hukm. It's the plural of hukm, rulings. And these rulings have to do with all the practical things, salat, fasting, how many times, hajj, etc. And then we also have the aspect that deals with our akhlaq, the plural of khulq, our character, our nature, how we behave, these good traits. We would like to have good traits of bravery, justice, etc. We want to get rid of any bad traits, jealousy, anything, anger, anything that could be negative. Now when it comes to the things that have to do with aqaid, the things that have to do with our beliefs, these are things which we cannot follow or do taqleed in. We know, everyone knows what taqleed is, and inshallah we'll talk about it a little bit more in the coming classes. But when you're following someone who's a scholar, you don't follow them when it comes to things of aqaid. You don't follow them when it comes to beliefs. I can't say that because my marj of taqleed believes in the judgment day, then I guess I believe in judgment day. Or because my marj of taqleed believes that there were these ma'sumin, that I also believe that based on that. No, the things that are our beliefs, we have to have proof for them, and we have to believe them based on solid proof. They're proven to us, we understand them, and these are things that are not based on following, they are based on proof. Yes, we can look to what our marja says as far as the proofs that they use or may have used as examples in understanding, but we do not do taqleed when it comes to our aqaid and our beliefs. When it comes to these different types of ahkam, in actuality, this is what we call, or we will call the sharia. There is a verse in the Quran that mentions that as far as Allah is concerned, the religion in Allah's eyes is Islam. Inna deena indallahi al-Islam. Now, I want to explain. Some mufassir, some of those who do tafsir and interpret the Quran, say that this Islam means surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That in Allah's eyes, religion is the surrender to Allah, whatever religion. Other mufassirs explain that Islam, it actually, when you look at how Islam is used in the Quran, we have, for example, places where other prophets said to their children, I believe Prophet Yaqub says, don't leave this world except that you're in a state of being Muslim. Other places where it says that other refers to other prophets as being Muslim. So their religions, these are prophets that came before Prophet Muhammad, so they weren't Muslim in the term that we use to refer to Muslims today. What it means is that they surrendered to Allah and were following the same guidelines of whatever Allah had commanded them to do. So Christianity in its essence, or the word that Prophet Isa told to people, this is the same word that Prophet Muhammad, that Prophet Noah, that Prophet Ibrahim, that all of the prophets came to give people. There can't be a difference in the message in its essence. That means that we can't have one message that says, for example, Allah is one God, and then Allah says, I'm going to send another prophet to confuse you. There's 3 gods, and I'm going to send another one to tell you there's 2. I'm going to trick people and see which one you're going to believe. That doesn't make sense. That's outside of Allah's justice. What Allah wants is to guide people. Right? The goal is perfection. He wants to see mankind achieve this perfection. How are they going to achieve perfection? He says, this is the way that you achieve perfection. Here is the book and the plan, that this is the strategy for how you're going to achieve perfection. So in this strategy, there's some things that are necessary, some things that are helpful, but He gives us a comprehensive plan for how we can achieve our success. Please recite salawat. Now, even though all of these religions, in essence, every prophet, they brought the same message. No prophet came and said, one said, be good to your neighbor, one said, be mean to your neighbor. They all said the same essential message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then there were some differences, obviously. As it mentions, it says, لَكُلِّ جَعَلْنَا مِنْكُمْ شِرْعَةً وَمِنْهَاجًا. For every ummah, for every nation, we gave them a sharia. We gave them a legislation. We gave them a path to follow. So this is more the details and the how-to of parts of religion. So even if Allah enjoined prayer on every single religion that came before it, or fasting for other religions, what is different is the Sharia and the way that He has said that in Islam you do the prayer in this way, or you fast in this particular way. Other previous prophets, for example, they were fasting one entire day, eating the next day. Fasting the whole entire day, eating the next day, in this format. And so when Islam was revealed, they explained that this is the way, for example, that someone who's following the Quran, they should fast in this way. Prayer, there may have been differences in the way that people prayed and made dua. And Islam came and said that in order to pray, Allah commands us to pray in this fashion or in this form. So there's a Sharia that's specific to Islam and the way that Muslims should do things. Although it is interesting just to mention that when it comes to, as far as prayer goes, there are, in the Bible itself, it mentions that Prophet Isa alayhi salam, that it's one verse that mentions that he walked forward, he leaned forward, and he prostrated on the ground. Meaning that the way that Prophet Isa prayed was in prostration. He would put his forehead to the ground and do sajda. And we know that from the beginning of time, this was something that was a tradition as far as prayer goes. Allah commanded the angels not to do sajda as an ibadah to Him, of course. But this ibadah, or this type of sajda, is some things that will be similar. And what we have in modern day Christianity or modern day Judaism, it may be different, from what was initially told or what they initially practiced. It mentions about Prophet Isa that he would make the night prayer. He would make the prayer all through the night. This is mentioned in the Bible in several places. It mentions about how during the time of Prophet Dawood and Sulaiman, again in the Bible, it mentions that people would pray in congregation, that they would gather together and they would pray. So maybe some of the things are not so different actually, and even in the legislation or the Sharia or the way that we're supposed to go about our acting out the beliefs and the things that we have understood in our laws of Islam. But when it comes to Islam, we have to look for the examples that Allah has set for us. And this best of examples, an Uswatun Hasanah, is in Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the person who is obligated to act upon these laws which have been given to us is the person who is aqil, who has aql. He is someone who is not mentally deficient. He is sane. Someone who is baligh, someone who has reached the age where they have taklif and they have an obligation. For a younger child, for example, it's not an obligation. So this is another condition. The third is that they're qadir, that they're able. They have the ability to perform the action. For example, if prayers needs to be done in this particular way where we're standing and bowing, etc., but someone, for whatever reason, they have some kind of physical deficiency, they're not able to do it in that way, then that is not an obligation for them. So they need to have at least these three conditions, that they have aql, that they have bulugh, and that they have qudra. They have the ability to do it. They have they're at the age of puberty, and they have the mental capacity, the intellect to perform these actions. One of the stories which never gets old of mentioning is the story of a young boy who he was not baligh, he was very young. Before he reached the age of puberty, but he was very smart, and he was very knowledgeable. He had learned and studied a lot. He did something, and he made his father upset, or his father wanted to catch him or spank him or something like that. So he did something, his father got upset, and his father went over to go get him. And as he's approaching the boy is running away. But the father is obviously going to get close to him because he's much bigger and faster and stronger. And so the boy begins to recite ayats of sajda, the wajib ayats of sajda. As we have in the Quran some verses, when you hear these verses, you have to stop what you're doing and make sajda. So the boy began to recite these ayats of sajda, and he runs away, and the father has to stop and do sajda. So the boy keeps getting away. So then the father gets up and he starts chasing the boy again, and then the boy recites another ayat of sajda. The father has to stop, and he continues to get away. And he does this so many times, I don't know how many times he does it, but every time the father has to stop and do sajda, and the boy gets away. So why? He was smart enough to understand that for me, this is not wajib, it's not an obligation, because I don't have that condition of being baligh. So it's not an obligation for me to do sajda. But I know that my dad is an obligation for him to do sajda. And I also am smart enough to know that I can get away a little bit more. So these are the conditions that we need to have in order for someone to be a mukallaf, to be necessary for them to perform these laws or whatever laws we have in Islam. When we talk about ahkam, there's two aspects that we are discussing, and that we will also discuss inshallah. One aspect are the things that have to do with the taklif, with the duty itself. For example, whether or not praying is wajib or not. Whether or not, for example, fasting during this time is a wajib or not. So whether or not it's wajib or haram, these have to do with one aspect of ahkam that we'll discuss. But there's another aspect that has to do with the how. how do we do this thing? This is called the wad'i things. For example, how do I pray? How many rakats? How long should it be? Where do I stop? Where do I prostrate? What happens if I forget one part of my prayer? What happens if I forget a lot often? This is the how part of it. So when we're talking about ahkam, we're talking about two things. We're talking about what kind of value does it have? Is it wajib or not? Then we're talking about how do we do it. So we want to discuss, actually to some extent that we have time in these classes, both aspects. One defines the value of the action, the other tells us how we actually perform this action. When we're talking about taklif, as you know, is divided into our duty is one of the 5 possible duties. This action, whatever it may be, it's either something that's an obligation for us. We have to do that. It's wajib. Like, for example, fasting during the month of Ramadan. There's some things that we have that these things are not allowed at all, that it's haram. For example, backbiting my Muslim brother. This is something that's haram and not allowed, and also a sin. There's some things which are recommended for us to do. These are good things. They're recommended. They're better for us to do, and they're going to help us in order to get closer to our goal of nearness to Allah or nearness to perfection. And that is the things that are mustahab, right? The things that are better to do, recommended to do. For example, it's highly, highly, highly recommended to pray in the time of the fadilat of the time. As soon as the prayer comes in. For example, the first 20 minutes or so that the prayer time comes in. Then we have the things that are better not to do. It's better if we stay away from those things. The things that are makruh. Then we have the things that are mubah, which there's no harm in doing it, and there's no benefit in doing it. And this could be a lot of different things. That there's no value necessarily in it of itself in that action. So what Allah has done is He's given value to everything that we can do in life. There's some value. It's like a system where we can get points for this, we can lose points for something, we acquire more points for this. There's some things that are better and some things that are not better. Now there's something that's very interesting. It mentions in Usul al-Fiqh, as you study the jurisprudence of the usul or the principles of this jurisprudence, one of the things that it mentions is a general rule of thumb, and that is that everything, that there is a spectrum from wajib to haram. There is a spectrum, and the things that are wajib are things that have absolutely the most benefit. It is haram because it is absolutely harmful. And Allah has taken this into consideration. As Imam Sadiq says that there's no shifa fil haram. That there's no benefit and cure in the things that are haram. But there's benefit and cure in the things that Allah has made wajib. Sometimes we look at things with this perspective. We look at things and we say that this thing that's wajib on me is wajib, it's a burden for me. I have to do this fast, I have to pray, it's extra work. Instead of we're looking at it as this is the thing what I absolutely need. Sometimes a parent will tell a child that you have to do this. And the child says, I don't want to do that. Why do I have to do that? I don't want to eat these vegetables. I don't want to study at this time. But the parent knows that there's a benefit in this that even he himself may not understand. But later on he may be able to gather or receive or understand what that benefit was. But either way, he's going to take the benefit from that. So maybe sometimes we come to fast or we come to pray and we don't truly understand what's the wisdom in this prayer. We don't understand why is this 2 rakats, why is this 3 rakats, etc. We don't necessarily understand it. But if we do it with the right intention, we will still get the benefit that Allah has intended for us to receive. Maybe that is the only thing that keeps us alive in or keeps our souls alive is that single prayer. Maybe Allah knows that, and that is why He's required that to be an obligation for us. And the things that are mustahab, even the word mustahab, it comes from hub. Hub meaning love, to be attached to something, to like something. Mustahab are the actions which you do out of love, which you do out of because you really feel that spiritual connection. Sometimes you just feel like, you know what, I really want to just make 2 rakat salat right now. I really just want to say, thank you Allah. I have so many things to be grateful for. Sometimes you feel a spiritual connection and you really want to be connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's mentioned that when you feel this type of inclination, that do those mustahabat. That's a good time to do it. That is not good to force mustahabat on yourself. That, for example, I just made it a formality that after I pray, I do my taqibat. I recite the du'as that are recommended after prayer. But I just do this forcefully, I rush through it, I don't pay attention to it, I don't even really want to do it. There's not as much value in that because it's not coming from love. I'm not loving this action. So the person who already understands that there's wisdom in the wajibat and the obligations that I have, that person is going to be more respectful and understanding of how much benefit those mustahabat can have. Again, keeping in mind the main goal, Allah wants us to achieve perfection. He wants us to mirror His perfection and His excellence as much as a human being possibly can. And He gives us this plan. He says, follow these things if you want to get there. These things are better for you. These things are not so good. These are the things that you need to do in order to achieve success, to be a perfect model example like the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, closing this portion of this talk, what I want to move forward into in the next Ahkam portion or practical law session is discussing those different aspects and some of the philosophy behind them. Even when we talk about wajib or some things that are wajib, there's different kinds of wajib. And I mean, as those people who are scholars or mujtahids, they know in all of these many different types of wajib, and I don't want to go into all of that much detail. Just I want to point out that there are some differences, and it's helpful when we understand what these differences are. It's helpful for our own ability to perform these actions. For example, we have something that's considered a wajib, aini. This means that this is a wajib that in and of itself, it's a necessity for a person to do. For example, for an individual, it's wajib for him to make, for example, Maghrib prayer. It's not as if someone else does it, it doesn't become wajib on him anymore. It's always wajib in and of itself on that person. In face of that, there's a wajib kifai. There's another kind of wajib where this is a wajib, for example, on the community. It has to be done. And if some people do this, then it's no longer an obligation for the other people. If everybody does it, great. But if some people do it at least, then it's okay if other people don't necessarily are not necessarily able to perform that action. For example, for burying a mayyit or namaz al-mayyit, that there needs to be, some people need to do that. Some people need to bury a Muslim when he dies. Whose job is it? Before it's done, it's everyone's job. It's everyone's duty. But as long as a group of people from amongst the Muslims carry out this obligation, then it's no longer an obligation for the rest of the people. There's, for example, amr bil ma'ruf, certain enjoining in what's good and forbidding vices, when it has to do with society as a whole. There are certain things that may happen in society. Is it everyone's obligation to, let's say for example, we're living in an Islamic community, there's one store that's selling something that's not lawful, that they should not sell, for example. At this time, someone needs to do amr bil ma'ruf, for example. If the conditions are met for amr bil ma'ruf, then someone needs to do this. Who needs to do it at that point? It's everyone's job until some group of people or one person or some people go and they do this in joining in good and forbidding of vices. So when some people do this, then this is no longer on the shoulders of the rest of the people. There's another kind of wajib, we say wajib ta'ini. This is a wajib that has been made specific. For example, again, it could be that this prayer that needs to be done at this time. This is a specific prayer needs to be done at a specific time. For example, let's say Salatul Fajr. This has been assigned at a specific time and nothing else can be done at that time besides the Fajr prayer. But then there's also, in face of that, a wajib tahiri. This is a wajib that I have a choice to do. Like for example, with Friday prayer. I have a choice to do Friday prayer as an obligation, or I can do, for example, Zuhr prayer instead of Friday prayer. So it's not that I do Friday prayer or I don't do anything else at all. I have a choice in this matter. This is also wajib, but I have a choice between the two. So this is a different kind of wajib where there's a choice in it. So there's ta'ini and ta'khiri that we talked about, a wajib that's specific, and then one where I have a choice between more than one wajib add. Then there's also the wajib that's aini and kifai. Wajib that's specific to one person, each individual, each mukallaf. And then wajib that's specific to at least some group of people need to perform this wajib. So inshallah we'll go into more details of this. And taqleed will be the first part of the ahkam that we start in the next session, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Created mankind so that he can achieve perfection. Now, in the process of achieving perfection, in order to reach the high level, like for example the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in order to achieve that level, then we need to know what's the path and the way that we need to go in order to get to that level. There's some things that every human being will understand. There's some things that are clear to everyone. The practical laws of Islam, understanding ahkam. And normally, when I teach this kind of a class, I would have a board and I would write down some of the things that you need to know to write down. But I still, either way, if we don't have the whiteboard available, I encourage you to make sure that you take notes and make sure that you write down the things that you learn. One of the best advices that I ever received was from Ayatollah Bahjat himself. He told me to always keep notebook, pen, or keep a way that you make notes. Even so much, it was so important, he gave me the money to do that. He said, take this, go buy a notebook, pen, make sure you always keep with you some kind of way that you can keep notes and remember all of the things that you learn. If you think about maybe in the course of your lifetime, how many Ramadans, how many Muharrams, how much Majalis you go to, if you put these some kind of way and consolidate them into a place, it's a lot of information. It's a lot of things that we can learn, we can review, and we can they'll stay better in our memory. You know, sometimes when someone asks you, what did you hear, what did you learn about a speech after the speech is done, then you remember a few things. You remember a funny story. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. As it was mentioned, today the class or the session that we're having is about understanding. You remember a couple of points, but not necessarily everything or that is important stayed in your mind. So one of the ways that you do that, you write it down. Just like when someone goes to class and they want to make sure they remember and retain the information, they write it down. So before we go into Ahkam itself and some of the philosophy behind it, first and foremost, before we even get to Ahkam, we need to understand that the reason why we are here, the reason for Allah creating us, is so that we can achieve perfection, right? That's the goal that Allah